Get ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. The Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast welcomes Todd Gallagher, a missionary to Ukraine, with an on-the-ground report, what's going on there and how we can help. And Todd Gallagher, welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you, a missionary, came to be in Ukraine? How did this come about?
So back in 2003, I did a short-term trip to Ukraine just to teach English. Then proceeded back to the United States and really kind of just really struck me as feeling the call to be something more than just a one-time missionary short-term trip. And we proceeded to have a global missions conference at our church, pretty large church in Florida. I met a girl there who was a translator for a group from Ukraine. Well, to make a long story short, I had in contact with this girl a little bit more, did another mission trip over there in her area, and a year and a half later we were married. We proceeded I had moved to Virginia just as we got married there in early 2005. We started working with our church there to do short-term trips, not just to Ukraine, but to other places around the continent. But we led trips over to Ukraine for about 12, 13 years until we decided, we could do a lot more if we moved there full time. So again, I went to seminary, and then I proceeded to quit my job, sell everything. And in early 2018, we moved to Ukraine.
I would imagine that times there within the time you went in 2018 till now are quite different. So talk to us a little bit about your life there before the war took place, because I'm sure things have changed drastically, and we'll get to that in a few minutes.
One thing that we really had a lot of in Ukraine was the freedom to tell others about the gospel. We weren't allowed to go into schools per se with the direct message of the gospel, but I was able to also go into the schools to teach English, because they love when a native speaker comes in to teach English, and go into the public schools and some private schools to teach English, and then use the Bible as a comparison for teaching English, which they didn't mind that, because they saw it as a real tool, that you had lots of Ukrainian translation in there that you could then compare with English translation. So it was a way of indirectly being able to use the English as a foreign language platform to share the gospel.
Many people in the United States really have no idea what day-to-day life was like in Ukraine, and having lived in the United States as you did and grown up here, give us a comparison of how things are, how they're similar, and how they're different.
In the United States, we rely on rules for our structure. People have sets of rules, and we let these rules guide our behavior, our behaviors, especially in things like a car, or behavior at, say, a line that we're waiting to receive some good or service or governmental help. Where in Ukraine, it is much more of a take control of the situation yourself, and you're accountable for yourself, whether it's in the car and you want to drive on the side of the road around somebody. You take that responsibility. And so as a driver, I would say that's the number one big difference, is that you have to really have your head on a swivel, and, you've got to use your own responsibility to keep yourself safe there. And other things in society that it's not a very service-oriented society. We're spoiled in America with service. Service is what really defines a lot of things in America, and we rely on that service to help us throughout the day. And so you have to really work hard to get what you need, whether it's with the government or whether you are, building a house. You really have to kind of do your own legwork.
I think many people are having a hard time ciphering through the information that's coming to us about what's going on there and this attack. Could you give us a sense of how widespread this attack is and even the genesis of it? Because people are very confused.
This certainly goes back before 2014, but let's talk about 2014 as really the biggest start of this. And since 2014, when Russia proceeded to take Crimea, they had already 20,000 Russian troops there as part of agreement with Ukraine to have a port there in the southern port of Crimea, which is a very large peninsula out into the Black Sea. They took over that somewhat with the help of the current leadership of Viktor Yanukovych, the Ukraine's pro-Russian leader. They also, on the eastern half, it's called the Donbass area. It's just a sliver on the very eastern part where it borders Russia, was another area that had a lot of Russian sympathizers, that people that were really Russian in all their life. And, they go back and forth across the border, and it made it simple for Russia to free prisoners of war and put weapons in their hand and teach them. And they pressed on into that territory and basically took over that eastern portion of Ukraine called the Donbass region. That spurred the revolution down in Maidan Square in Kiev, where the leadership, Yanukovych, was overthrown. He was really exiled to Russia. And since that time, Russia has threatened more and more with taking further land in the east, trying to slowly but surely push farther westward and take more and more there. So that's continued on until, of course, the end of last year, when the additional troops started mounting in and around the country, supposed exercises in Belarus that were allowing a lot of Russian troops to proceed into Belarus and then spread out at the borders. And additional resources came in on the eastern half as well, leading into them proceeding to send their jets in and start with the rocket warfare some 2.5 weeks ago.
So looking at the lay of the land, how much of Ukraine is actually impacted directly by these attacks? And I'm guessing the rest of them are just waiting for it to come to where they are? 2/3 of Ukraine
has received some sort of military incursion, meaning either land troops, tanks, or rocket fire. And so it's really only the southwestern portion, that third little pocket in the southwest, that has been unscathed as of yet. Help us to understand what the goal of Russia is in all of this. It's obviously a vicious attack on the people, but they must have some goal beyond that. What are they trying to accomplish here? Because they can't have too many people who are sympathetic to all of these bombs and the attacks. And that's a very interesting and debated question. Many will say that, Putin wants to take over and pull Ukraine completely into and absorb into the Russian Federation. But the majority of people are saying no, he really wants to just maintain this government and make it this government that he assigns be a pro-Russian leaning government, knowing that the people, as you said, the people of Ukraine don't want to come under the Russian Federation, and he will have it's hard to rule a land when the people don't want to be served by you or you serve them. And so I really believe it is that second one, where he wants to put his own government in that leans towards Russia, just like Belarus does, and it gives him that additional buffer zone. And really, it's just a puppet regime that enables him to do what he wants and when he wants in and through Ukraine, and it effectively makes it a part of the Russian Federation without physically making it formally that part. So that's what I believe.
We've seen the stories and talked with people who are estimating 1.5 to 2 million refugees having left Ukraine into other areas. Tell us about this flow of refugees and what you're witnessing.
That first week when it happened, you saw this rush of refugees, and the majority of people were trying to get to Poland being the most rich country that is neighboring to Ukraine, and not necessarily the most convenient to get to, but the most rich to get to. And so there was that majority exodus where some 300,000 people that first 4 or 5 days were leaving, and the majority being in Poland. The other countries were primarily Romania and Moldova, and then a few to Bulgaria and Hungary. But Poland saw a massive rush at that border. And I know in that first week, there were wait times as long as 4 days, which has now even increased. It has become just a massive humanity coming. Now, you asked us that question. My direct experience is with Romania. This is where I'm serving in Romania now. And the initial surge into Romania was not bad. It was very palatable. It was sometimes as little as a 15-minute walk wait to get across the border. When we went over 3 days ago, the walk time, it's the people that are being dropped off, and then they walk across. The wait time was 12 to 15 hours as we interviewed some people at the very front of the line, finding out how long they were waiting. The car wait time was 70 hours. It was a 5-kilometer long line. It was a massive line and again, sadly, I understand Ukraine does not want to allow people to go across so much. They don't want to lose their people. And I think that what they're doing is instituting such slow processing times there that it is causing these massive backups and, trying to dissuade people from leaving. That's what I envisioned, or what I saw there as we were in the humanitarian aid lines, able to bypass all of that wait time. Our processing was roughly an hour, but we saw how little people they processed that were in those two other regular civilian lines.
And again, just to understand it, as I understand how you've explained it, Todd, that this is the Ukrainian government or agents of the government who are slowing this flow in order to inhibit people from leaving?
Yes, and so these are my observations. I've asked this question, and people have said, "Oh, undoubtedly that's true," but I certainly have not heard that from any government officials, and that was simply my observation that other people have affirmed, and I understand that they don't want the people to leave.
The Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast. We're talking with Todd Gallagher, a missionary to Ukraine. We'll return in just a moment.
Online at schillingshow.com.
BorderHawk.news is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration, nationalism, and globalism. The BorderHawk staff daily curates immigration news stories and, in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.news highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. BorderHawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border, as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.news will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.news. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Get your fix. Schilling Show Unleashed.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast returns with Todd Gallagher, a missionary to Ukraine, with an on-the-ground report. We've heard reports here in the United States and talking about the people that are being allowed to leave are strictly women, that Ukrainian men are required to stay. And I wondered what your observations were, and also what this portends for the future of Ukraine if women, particularly childbearing age women, are leaving the country.
The mindset, the things that we're doing here are not only humanitarian aid into the country, but we originally started saying, hey, we can help the refugees coming over the border and finding, places of shelter for them, housing, food, and basic needs, and support that from that perspective. Virtually everyone that has come across in that form, meaning it's the wife and the kids of the husband that has to stay behind because of his necessity to potentially fight. They all believe that they are going to return someday, very soon. I mean, they're thinking, month. This cannot last much more than a month, maybe a month and a half, and we're going to return. That is their belief. On the other hand, there are some families that if you have more than 3 kids, they were allowing the fathers to go out. Now, I don't know how much of a written rule that is, but that's what they have been doing. I know here in Romania that the border patrol, the Ukrainian border patrol, was allowing the 3 or more kids with the father to proceed across with the mother. And their intentions has widely been, we're trying to get to Germany. We're trying to get to Sweden. We're trying to get to some the countries where they have some familiarity with, to set up new life. And those are the ones that I think are really going to devastate Ukraine post this war.
Could you help us with understanding maybe some of the stories of your encounters with these refugees? What are they telling you about what they've experienced? It just appears so horrible from what we're seeing, but these are just pictures on a screen. What do you hear from people?
The night before last, we brought in from the southern border of Romania, which borders, there's a little peninsula of Ukraine, coming from Odessa. We're getting a lot of people that way, not just from the north side of the country, but this group of 2 mothers, 5 children. One of those children was 5 days old. She was coming through, and they were coming through Moldova and then down into Romania from that way from Ukraine. And not supposed to have her child for another 3 weeks. Well, I guess the child didn't know that and decided it's time to come out. And so she had to stop at a hospital in Moldova, had that child, and then proceeded with that child. And so she came in, no clothes, just the clothes that they gave her at the hospital, blankets. And so we were able to get her clothes and get her set up with formula that they had recommended, and then have her placed in a place here in Brașov, Romania, which is really central Romania. But that's just one example. Another quick example was a family of 13, mother and father, 11 kids. That they're here and they are trying to immigrate to the United States. They really like to do that. So we've helped them with the paperwork and getting that set up with an attorney, an immigration attorney here in Romania to help them proceed. But so you get from all different walks of life. Many that have come from the East have witnessed the direct shelling and have seen the real damage. The others have just seen the kind of the threats of it with the jets and the distance bombs, at the airports and such.
I'm particularly interested in how the children are coping with this. I mean, adults are looking at this from a different level and with a greater understanding. But the children I have such a heart for, especially. Would you tell us what you're witnessing and how these children are responding to this situation?
One of the most interesting times is being at the border when they're coming across the border. They've just had maybe a 12, 15-hour, 3-day trip where they've gone from place to place to get across the border in a safe fashion. These kids, they are met with, on the Romanian side of the border, with hundreds of people trying to give them anything they can to make them feel good, whether it's a teddy bear or whatever. And these kids are just oblivious. They're looking around like, is this a party for me? Or is what is going on here? Have we made it to where we're trying to be? And of course, their journey is just starting. They're just getting across, and then they're going to go to somewhere that of course, they don't necessarily know where, but they are just dumbfounded with what's happening, not knowing what is truly going on. But mom, they know, is totally worn out totally unable to carry them anymore. And it's just a really, really heartbreaking situation. And knowing how to help them, because they just need to get somewhere where they can rest and feel safe and be, have some quiet.
We talk a lot about supply chain disruptions in the United States, but I would imagine that our situation here is minuscule compared to what's going on in Ukraine. Could you tell us about the availability of goods and supplies on a daily basis for the people that are living in Ukraine?
Yeah, so we are in direct contact with people that are inside the band of Russian tanks that circle Kiev. And then we're also in contact with the south central Ukraine that has only seen air fire come upon it and no land troops. Of course, those situations are two different situations. We have had great success getting support into the south central, even where there has been Russian incursion via the Air Force. We've not had any problems there, but where we have had the problems is getting into that band in Kiev. We can't get big trucks in. Ultimately, we are filling many smaller cars just in the back with goods, able to get them in that way. They're much more nimble. They can get into the back roads more, but no real large amounts of goods. We've had some ceasefire agreements on the east in Mariupol area where you've maybe seen the shelling in the last few days, and those agreements hold up for maybe 6, 8, 10 hours. We know of not our direct people, but people that we have worked with that have been shot at. One driver was actually shot that was in a marked humanitarian aid truck. That's been really a tough to know that there's this aid that's waiting to get in there, and they can't.
There's a lot of discussion here in the U.S. about how we should be responding. And what is the perspective of Ukrainians about the U.S. response to this, and do they think it's sufficient?
This is a tough one, because we always try to apply our logic to everything and why we can do things and why we can't. And man, logic kind of goes out the window when you are under fire and you need help. And they just really want NATO and the American government to support them in a better way, knowing that if they could just have a no-fly zone, knowing that if they just had the Air Force, knowing that if they just had the military support, they could end this. And so it's a simple equation for them. Just do this and you will help. But of course, it's not as simple as that. But yeah, they really don't want to understand why, because they know it just can be done. And this is what will fix things.
Tell us about the receptivity of people to the gospel, particularly in light of this war going on. I would imagine things have changed at least just a little bit.
Even before we left, we were gearing up the churches in our region to say, this is where we can thrive. We can be the light that God has put us here for in such a time. And so even though no one, 99.9% of Ukrainians, until the day that he crossed over, believed that it would happen, people were still afraid. They were still a little more on edge. And so we saw a much more receptivity to talk with us, to engage with us. Even when we said we're from such and such Baptist church, they would still they didn't shy away from us. They didn't think, oh, here comes something. They would engage with us, and they received what we would have to say with them. So we minimally saw that people were much more willing to talk with us. And so I really believe that now is the time for the church to shine in there, and that's where a majority of the distribution centers are being placed, as in the churches in and around all of these areas.
If our listeners would like to assist in the effort, is there something they can do directly to help your ministry, Todd?
Yes. We have a tax-deductible site that my sending church has graciously set up for us, where 100% of what is put in there gets to us directly. And that can be found at thb.church. That's short for the Heights Baptist.church. So thb.church, and the giving link is on that page there. You'll see.
I would encourage people to go there. Todd Gallagher, a missionary to Ukraine. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for joining us here today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. We will continue to pray for your safety and success.
Thank you very much, Rob. God bless.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at shillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time.